Well, hey there. So here I am in beautiful park in Birmingham, the only one here. And largely the macro purpose of this video is just to continue to try and get more comfortable with sharing my thoughts, my cogitation, as it were, with people, and trying to do a better job of framing my more complex or to other people and sometimes to myself challenging thought processes, both as a way to model ways in which other people might think, but also hopefully to reveal some places where we could maybe do a better or more expansive job as a society of thinking about and discussing certain things. And what I'd like to talk about today is, well, frankly, the ideas of death and appropriation. What connection, Patrick, is there between death and appropriation? What are you getting at with this? Well, on my way here to the park, I walked by many houses that are already decorated for Halloween. And I'll just be very straightforward in saying that, you know, a skeleton sitting on somebody's doorstep reminds me of COVID and reminds me of the current pandemic crisis that we're in. Ditto gravestones in the yard that say RIP. How does this connect to appropriation? Well, in a couple ways. On the one hand, in one of my classes, we've recently been considering the short story Memento, Mori by Jonathan Nolan, who you may know better as the brother of Christopher Nolan, the co-writer of such screenplays as Inception, The Dark Knight, Interstellar, but also one of the creators and writers for the show Westworld without his brother. Jonathan Nolan, a really tremendous writer. One thing that I realized was going sort of missed in our class discussions of Memento Mori is this differentiation among cultures with regard to how we view and conceptualize death. Memento Mori, very, very, very simply put, a Memento Mori can be a literal reminder of sort of the fatalistic nature of human life, our mortality, if you will, the fact that death will sort of come for us all. So it could be something like a skull. It could be something like an ofrenda. But to my understanding and my admittedly limited knowledge, the cultures from which we appropriate this expression and concept of Memento Mori, which in a larger sense is just a reminder to remember that we are mortal and that death will come for us all, the cultures, as I understand it, where this concept is drawn from, are not necessarily cultures that, like I think we do here in the United States, establish this binary of life or death and view death as a bad thing. And there's an interesting connection to a video I watched just yesterday, which referenced the story of the Garden of Eden, and erroneously stated that Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. Actually, the forbidden tree is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So I think if you'd like an interesting starting point for considering how it is that sort of Western and sort of Judeo-Christian based societies conceptualize just binaries in general, is we tend to separate them. We don't view them as a circle. We don't view them as a collective whole. We tend not to see life and death as different ways of looking at the same experience or same process. I mean, it's a transfer of energy. I have energy and things that are happening in my corpus, my body right now. But as Mufasa says, when I die, I'm going to become the grass and the antelope are going to eat it. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm in line with Mufasa's teaching, because I think it's pretty messed up that the hyenas are essentially excluded from his so-called circle of life. But that's another story for a different day. Back to this idea of appropriation and Halloween. Last year I was asked by a member of my school community to address appropriation in my classroom right around the time of Halloween. And I was uncomfortable doing so because I felt like I correctly sort of assumed that to this person who was speaking to me, the nature of appropriation was a pretty narrow lane. Basically, don't appropriate things from other cultures. This is a particular concern or issue around Halloween because of the costumes people will wear. Specific costumes were mentioned, for instance, American Indian sort of garb, whether traditionally respectful or not, worn by someone who is not a member of a tribe, is often seen as problematic. But there are other cases of sort of cultural appropriation that happen all the time that we don't necessarily pay attention to. For instance, when I emceed the middle school Halloween dance, someone came dressed up in an inflatable sumo wrestler costume. which everyone thought was hilarious. And I was sitting there thinking like, well, hey, wait a minute, how is this any different than wearing an Indian headdress? Seems like we're really having a laugh at a very significant and culturally resonant part of some people's lives, and we just haven't been told not to otherize that particular aspect of a culture. So it's not on our radar, and we don't question it, which I'm not saying is necessarily wrong, but I think it's interesting for us to consider as we move into Halloween, how Halloween is this huge focal point of the idea of appropriation. To appropriate originally meant to dole or met out. Basically, to appropriate something was to give it to someone, to tell them what was acceptable or what they could do. So in a very sort of ironic and wonderfully meta way, like when we talk about culturally appropriating things or cultural appropriation, essentially what we're doing is appropriating the right way to think about appropriation to people. Appropriation, to appropriate something, also means the exact converse of its original definition. It also now means to take on for yourself, to take something into your culture from some other place. And cultural appropriation as a concept, as an expression, is derivative of an earlier idea of artistic appropriation, and a question of what is an artist allowed to take from outside disparate sources and incorporate into their personal work. Like, what are the lines that we can and can't cross there? So I guess I would encourage people as we approach Halloween to think about all the different ways in which appropriation plays into the holiday. We're taking things from different cultures from all around the world, different ideas of how to recognize, commemorate, celebrate, or even in some cases fear death. And I would suggest that while we have a pretty good understanding that by, say, letting kids dress up as skeletons or ghosts or scary animals on Halloween, we are taking some of the sting out of the fear of those things. But I'm not sure we fully embrace this idea of taking the sting out of death itself. I don't think we've quite gone far enough in our American tradition in using Halloween as a time to recognize and sort of celebrate and commemorate the way in which those people who have passed on, those souls who have left us, stay with us. And I think that we still as a society have a long way to go to basically get to a better place where we can collectively understand and come to terms with the natural process of living and dying, which I sort of view as the same thing. So I hope this wasn't too roundabout. I hope it wasn't too all over the place. Please feel free to disagree with me either in person or I suppose in a comment here for anyone who actually watches these things if you have different ideas, or maybe you could let me know a case of, say, appropriation, cultural, artistic, or otherwise, that you see as society, you think that society is missing or not addressing. So anyway, it's a wonderful day. Hope you're able to get outside, have some fun. I'll talk to you soon.